In the Republican primary, and the party, I guess, in general, there seem to be two factions. Establishment candidates like yourself and outsider candidates like Fiorina and Carson. These outsiders, though, have proven to be worthy opponents thus far anyway. And how do you, as an establishment figure, and some would call you a career politician, how do you convince voters to support you when many Americans appear to be looking for someone who is going to disrupt the political norm in Washington, D.C.? You
know, it's sort of funny. I was sitting with Bob Walker, who's with us today, conservative, Trent Lott, and we were sitting in a trailer out in California. And Lott looks at Walker and said, "When did we ever become rhinos?" Okay. And my question is, when did I ever become establishment? I mean, you know, I was with Tom Bliley in Richmond yesterday, and I was saying, well, they call me establishment. He belly laughs at that. You know, look, from the time I got into politics all the way through where I am today, there is no one I can think of who has consistently shaken up the status quo more than I have. Mm-hmm. Do you know what it's like to be a Republican on Defense Committee and you start trying to limit the production of a weapons system, or you're trying to affect procurement? You know what it's like to be an individual member of the House and be offering budgets against your own president? Yeah. Do you know what it's like to fight against your own Appropriations Committee? Do you know what it's like to go to Ohio and face the problems I had and say we're not raising taxes and shake the state from top to bottom, and in your first year become the most unpopular governor in America because you're a change agent? Mm-hmm. So, you know, what I can do, though, Javier, is what I can do is I know how to get it done. Mm-hmm. I not only want to stand on people stand on a street corner and shout for change, but if you don't get it done, what did you achieve? What's the point? So yesterday I was with a congressman in Virginia, and he was blaming the Senate for not being able to pass their balanced budget out of the House. Mm-hmm. I said, well, whose fault is it? Is it the failure of the Senate, or is it the failure of the House to not convince the Senate what they ought to do? Mm. So, you know, I've spent my whole life badgering people and persisting and achieving. Mm-hmm. And so establishment from the standpoint of I know how to move the system, but it would be kind of hard. You'd have a lot of people laughing if you called me a member of the establishment. But, you know, if you can operate in both worlds, it makes you pretty effective because we need a lot of change in this country. Yeah, and I've seen in your history a willingness to step out boldly. So, but who'd have thunk one time I had thunk it that you'd be called establishment today? One time I had a bill to change corporate welfare. I said, if we're going to reform welfare for poor people, we ought to reform welfare for rich people. So the Business Roundtable invited me to one of their dinners. And I got up to speak because the things I was doing was, you know, they didn't really like very much. And I said, you know, what's so great about this tonight, if I didn't have this provision on corporate welfare, I would be serving the dinner, not eating the dinner, okay? Let's talk a little bit about fiscal responsibility. Now, you spent, I think, 18 years in Congress and have been credited, and I think rightly so, as one of the chief architects behind balancing the budget way back in 1997 as the chair of the House Budget Committee. And we know that that's part of your resume and what you talk about, and rightly so. I believe you're proud of it, and you should be. So you probably have a very unique insight on this issue. But right now, as we stand, for every $1 that the U.S. spends on children, generally, we spend about $3 on seniors. And according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, because of an aging population, of course you and I know a bit about that, if we continue on this path, in about 10 years, we'll be spending something closer to $4.50 on seniors for every $1 that we spend on a child. Clearly, the path is going to require some difficult decisions moving forward. So my question is, if you become president, how will you work to make sure the government is making smart, long-term investments like prioritizing kids while not bankrupting the rest of us? Well, that's why you have to have experience and knowledge and deep knowledge at a point in time where the demographics are kind of working against us. And so, you know, the situation is you don't want to pull the rug out from under seniors who become very dependent on benefits. On the other hand, you've got to think about what you're going to do to stabilize the system. Now, let me tell you, back in 1999, I offered a proposal on Social Security that would have, excuse me, protected our seniors, would have started the baby boomers at a slightly lower rate in the way in which you calculate Social Security benefits, and it would have trickled all the way down, and it would have given our young people a private account of 2% that would have been paid for out of the $5 trillion projected surplus that we had when I left Congress. That thing has sat there for 16 years. Now, Javier, when you go to the doctor and the doctor says you got a problem, I would assume you would say, okay, let's deal with it now. In this town, you know you have a problem, and you obfuscate. I've been working on saying that word now for 2 weeks.
That's
I got it out really well there.
I'm writing it down. How do you spell it?
No, they just bury their heads in the sand, and what they do is blame somebody else, because there's not the leadership to get these things fixed. So when we look at Social Security now, the problem is a lot more severe. The consequences of delaying are going to be bigger. What I just said to you was pretty simple, would have fixed the program for many, many decades. So we're now looking at and we'll have things to say. There are many Social Security plans. We've got to figure out which one brings about the greatest equity, both to the seniors, to young people, and what is it that we can have pass. Now, that will probably come a little bit later for me, but soon I'll be talking about Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare, of course, is a critical program, and it is running out of money. So we're going to have some things to say about this in the next couple weeks. And but there's nobody, Javier, that's balanced more budgets or proposed more. I've written 18 of them, so I'm just starting to get good at it. In terms of young people, like in our state, we have a Medicaid issue for poor people. I expanded Medicaid because I wanted to make sure we could help the mentally ill and the drug addicted and the working poor to get on their feet and be productive. But at the same time, we've dealt with Medicaid, a lot of which affects our seniors. We also believe in early childhood education. So it's a question of balance. You know, we are trying to control the rising costs of higher education. We've invested a ton of money in K through 12 education. You can't ignore your seed corn. You can't ignore your young. We believe in mentoring programs in the schools. You know, the early childhood education is so critical because it allows the brain to develop you know, when kids are really young. It's all about balance. Isn't life really about balance? Yeah. It's about figuring out how do you help this and not obliterate that and try to make it all work. And I'm confident we can do that. And economic growth, of course, is the most important thing for everybody in this country. If you don't have economic growth, everything falls flat. But with economic growth, it's amazing how much more you can do to help people.
Yeah. Let me chat a little bit more about Medicaid and health care. As governor of Ohio, you chose to expand Medicaid, contrary to what Republican legislators in your state wished for. Now, I'm sure that you knew...
That's not really true. Let me explain the process to you.
You call me a liar, Governor?
No, I'm not that guy.
I'm just getting
what
sensitive.
What happened was, let me just tell you the story. I think it's a very interesting one. Our head of mental health and drug rehab was in my office. And I looked at her, and because we had to make a decision about expanding Medicaid. And she's a lady, she's on the helpline. She knows the problems that people have. And she's in my office, and I said, Tracy, what do you think I'm going to do with the Medicaid? Do you think I'm going to expand Medicaid? She says, well, you know, every night I pray that you'll do it because there's so many people in need. And I said, okay. I said, well, guess what? Your prayers are answered because I am going to expand Medicaid. It wasn't that hard decision. She walked out of my office, went into the anteroom, and broke down and cried of joy. Wow. And we did it for a couple reasons. First of all, we've been able to control Medicaid. Our Medicaid program went from a 10% growth to a 2.5% growth in our second budget without cutting one benefit or taking anybody off the rolls. This is the program that states have the hardest time being able to control. It isn't because I'm such a great guy, but I got great people working in the Medicaid area. Secondly, you know, the mentally ill, do they belong in prison if they're bipolar or schizophrenic? I don't think so. And if they're in prison, they cost $22,500 a year. If I can get them on their medication and we can have the community work with them, to not have them in jail and save $22,500 a year, and then let them get a job where they actually become tax-paying citizens and realizing their God-given purpose. Or if you take somebody who's addicted to drugs, and if we don't rehab them, they come in and out of prison, and maybe we see them breaking into our home, or maybe they die from an overdose. If we can help to get them out of prison, and a recidivism rate, by the way, for those that we treat and pass over to the community is less than 20%. The recidivism rate nationally is almost 50%. When we do that and they become productive, or if you're the working poor and you spend all your time in the emergency room, we all pay anyway, because you go there when you're sicker and more costly. So we give you some comprehensive care. So we believe over time it's a smart issue of arithmetic, but there's another issue. How about morality? You know, how about being a country that can embrace and help people to get on their feet? Now that may not make a headline, and that may not make some people happy, but you know what? I'm not in this business to have a headline. I am in this business to make sure that everybody has a chance to be lifted. And it's worked in our state. Now, if people don't want to expand Medicaid, that's okay with me. But my question for them is, what are you going to do about the mentally ill? What are you going to do about the drug addicted? The first time this bill went through the legislature didn't want to vote on it because they wanted to avoid primaries. But the leadership of the legislature made sure that it happened. This time, the House and the Senate have both approved expansion, and we have a very conservative legislature. So maybe in a way we're starting to win the order of the day. It's a long answer, but it's important to hear.
No, I think it is important, and I appreciate the compassionate conservatism, but compassionate approach.
Well, there's the other side of it, though. Let me tell you, like we have drug courts. We don't fool around with that. This is not a matter of just give, give, give. You have to accept personal responsibility where you are. It's like my mother used to say, it's a sin not to help people who need help, but it's equally a sin to continue to help people who need to learn how to help themselves. And so with all these programs, we got a large element of personal responsibility in there.
Great question. Great answer. Thank you. Let me ask a little bit about your private sector experience on Wall Street specifically. While some candidates boast about their private sector experience and other candidates boast about their public sector experience, you're someone who actually has both. In 2001, I believe, after about 18 years in Congress, you joined Lehman Brothers as a managing director. And you worked there until the firm's collapse in 2008, which many would say kind of started, and it was the catalyst of the financial crisis. Now, during the 2010 Ohio gubernatorial race, your opponent, at the time sitting Democratic Governor Ted Strickland, didn't hold back on attacking you because of the experience on Wall Street. In fact, I think one of the attack ads said that you, and I quote, got rich while Ohio seniors lost millions. So what would you say to voters who might be wondering
about that?
If you were to become the president, would you have their best interests at heart?
Well, first of all, the guy that was attacking me lost the election the first time in 36 years. So let's, look, I operated a two-man office. This has been exhaustively investigated. I operated a two-man office in Columbus, Ohio. And my job was to travel around the country helping companies to get stronger so they could create jobs. And as I said to somebody, if I could bankrupt Lehman Brothers from a two-man office in Columbus, Ohio, I should be Pope, not this guy who's currently there. So look, it was a great experience, Javier, because I got to really understand how job creators and business leaders and boards of directors make decisions. I mean, I spent time in the Silicon Valley with, at Google. You think I learned anything about innovation and how America's going to move forward? I worked in financial services, understanding the challenges that small, medium, and community banks have. I worked in the industrial space with steel companies where I learned about not only the difficulties that they face on dumping from foreign companies and destroying jobs and markets, but the challenges that they have in terms of bringing heavy industry back to America. This was fantastic, but that's not all I did. I also was on some boards and I taught, But one of the things you need to know is I also worked at Fox News, where I was a giant television star, Javier.
I've heard.
Yes,
yes.
I was really.
In fact, I was hoping for an autograph when we were wrapped up here.
Well, if you don't remember, I have tapes in the car I can give you. But then, look, here's the situation. My father carried mail on his back. His father was a coal miner. My mother's mother lived with us. She could barely speak English. She came from Yugoslavia. Which says something about my views on immigration, doesn't it? If we didn't have immigration then, I'd probably be running for president of Croatia or something. Yeah. But I understand when wind blows the wrong way that people find themselves out of work. I understand. I lived with it. I mean, I just was back in my hometown with NBC. My daughters call it Dad's great disappearing childhood. All the buildings I went to are knocked down, and you know, it's a tough hardscrabble, blue-collar place. And, you know, when you grow up like that, it's in your DNA. So I think it's good to see all levels, all sides of society to get a real understanding of how lots of things work.
Let's talk a bit more about immigration. Our association, for starters, views immigration reform as an economic imperative. That we believe could unleash innovation, create new businesses, attract the world's best talent to our shores. And I sense that you and I probably see eye to eye on that. However, where I don't think that you and I see eye to eye, and correct me if I'm wrong, is in this building of a wall. And using that as a solution for fixing a broken immigration system. We know that the U.S.-Mexico border is about 2,000, it's like 1,900, about 2,000 miles long. And the National Journal estimated that building a wall that long would cost about $6.4 billion. And what we've seen over the years is that people will manage to find a way to get around it, under it, above it, through it. And very importantly, I'd like to note that roughly half of our nation's quote-unquote undocumented immigrants are actually here by way of overstaying their visas and not through illegal entry. So the question is, with all of that said, how do you propose we fix our broken immigration system and best harness what's good about the immigrant community, and particularly immigrant entrepreneurs? And how do we make that a competitive advantage for the American economy?
Where do you live, Javier?
Dallas, Texas, and here in Washington as well.
Do you lock your doors at night?
I do.
Really?
Yeah.
Don't you think a country needs to lock its doors? Now, the reason why you lock your doors is because you don't want people willy-nilly walking into your house. I voted for the '86 Reagan proposal. We never locked the doors. And a country that can't control its borders is a country that has a lot of chaos. Now, the $6 billion figure, they leave that much on the floor up on Capitol Hill every night. Okay, so let's not get hung up on the six. It is a lot of money, but it isn't prohibitive. And in terms of what we say, secure the border, build a wall, whatever, you know, there are technologies today that that can be just as effective as a physical wall. I mean, with the ability to have sensors and drones and things like that. I think it's just imperative that we control our border. Okay, but that being said, I believe we ought to have an effective guest worker program. I think people ought to be able to come in and work and be able to go back home. Without an effective guest worker program, then people will come in and try to sneak in and then sneak back and forth. And look, organized labor doesn't like an expanded guest worker program, but I favor it. And I have a lot of friends in organized labor, but on this issue, I think we should expand it, the guest worker, so people are comfortable. Secondly, once we have things in place, we don't want people coming over. If they come over, they have an excuse, they got to go back. No excuses, just go back. And then for those that are here that have been law-abiding, God bless them. I mean, they're a critical part of our society, from doctors to engineers to lawyers. Well, I don't know if we need any more of them, but we got a lot of teachers, whatever. And then I think they should have a path to legalization. And I think that can pass. And when you talk about the visa issue and all that, well, that's something that has to be dealt with. We don't want people overstaying their visas. And it looks to me as though the whole immigration has to be done in a way in which we address all the different elements. But the fundamentals are this: protect the border, guest worker, people who are here who have been law-abiding get to stay. I think that the American people would, I always hear politicians say, well, the American people, like, they're speaking for the American people. I mean, my sense of the years that I've been involved in government is the public would accept this as a reasonable proposal, and I think it passed the Congress. The idea that we're going to pick these folks up and ship them out, I mean, that is just unbelievable, the thought of it. What are we going to do, ride in neighborhoods and announce, come on out now, you're going to the border? I mean, first of all, it would send sheer panic through our families. I mean, there are families here that live in fear of being divided. I mean, could you imagine being a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old kid and being told they're going to ship your dad out? I mean, it's just not acceptable in America. So, and in terms of the whole immigration issue, we need to look. Should we broaden it? We need to clean up the visas. But at the end of the day, people are here now. Let them stay.
So that is in sharp contrast to your party's front runner. This fellow wants to export.
Look, remember I was telling you about stages?
No,
I was telling you about building a stage with the scaffolding. If you don't have the scaffolding, the stage collapses. I'm not worried about any of that. Because, when all is said and done, people are going to pick somebody that they think is a reformer, can get the job done, can land the airplane, and somebody that understands their problems. So I don't think about front runner now. Cripe. I don't think that really means much right now, unless we were having a national primary tomorrow, which we're not.
Okay. So guest worker program, build the wall, don't worry about the noise.
No, you can't. If you're a leader, you can't be. People scream loud. Okay, I hear you. Okay, let me think about what you're saying. And if what you're saying makes sense, okay, I'll consider that. But if it doesn't make sense just because you scream loud, how are we supposed to run a country like that?
It isn't going to make better sense because you scream louder.
You run the chamber. Does anybody ever squawk inside the chamber or any of your members? What do you do? Cave into them all the time?
No.
You don't?
So I'm asking the question,
seriously.
John. I asked the question. That's your second question. Let's stop with that.
Well, I'm very experienced in asking questions, especially with my daughters who are 15 and a half. But look, Javier, look, here's the thing. We are a country of immigrants, many of us, right?
Yeah.
What does the Hispanic community do for us? God-fearing, common sense, hard-working, fantastic. Part of our group, right? Part of who we are as Americans. And I don't care who's going to yell loud. Frankly, when I go to town halls, and they can yell at me all they want, I don't have a problem here. Now, the part of the difficulty we have in this town is we don't have leaders who are willing to lead instead of reacting to who yells the loudest.
Or worse yet, feeding on fear.
Well, look at Medicaid expansion. You know how many people are yelling at me? I go to events where people yell at me. You know what? You know what I tell them? I mean, God bless them. I'm telling them a little bit better at this. I said, there's a book. It's got a new part and an old part. They put it together. It's a remarkable book. If you don't have one, I'll buy you one. And it talks about how we treat the poor. I mean, sometimes you just have to lead. It's like fighting ISIS. It's, okay, are the American people ready to put boots on the ground in the Middle East? Well, if we don't stop ISIS, this becomes, at some point, a direct threat to the United States. It doesn't mean you don't listen, but you cannot let the yelling and the screaming determine your decision-making.
Point well made. I want to ask yet another follow-up because I haven't had enough of you yet. When you were, during the last RGA conference, you openly expressed a willingness to create a pathway to citizenship.
I said it wasn't off the table because I think when you go to negotiate, you got to be very careful about putting in absolutes. But I don't favor that. And the reason I don't favor it, Javier, is that, I don't believe in jumping the line. I don't believe that you ought to be rewarded for jumping in front of somebody else who's waiting. my wife and I have a friend who's had to go back to Nicaragua. She didn't want to go back to Nicaragua. She's abiding by the laws. She returned to Nicaragua, and she's really not happy with the fact that some people jumped the line in front of her. And you know, I just don't think you want to reward people that do the jump. And so a path of legalization to me is really appropriate. As far as I really would want to go. I just want you to know, though, that you have to be very careful. We got a lot of, we have people here, candidates or people in the country, slam their fist on the table. This is the way it's going to be. And whatever gets done, you have, one of the things, you know, Newt Gingrich told me one time when I was arguing with somebody, he said, you know, John, maybe you ought to figure out how to use your skills to unlock them. Knocking all the pieces off the chessboard doesn't help you win the game. So you got to be careful about what you do and what you say.
Point well made. Point well made. Let's talk just a bit, just a few thoughts on birthright citizenship. Where are you on birthright citizenship?
If you're born here, you're a citizen. Period. End of story. I don't want to even, it's not even worth going into.
Point well made.
Other than that's what I favor.
Okay.
We're not going to change the 14th Amendment. I can't even get a balanced budget amendment through, although I will when I become president.
All right, all right. I want to talk more generally about the Hispanic electorate. In 2012, it's no secret that President Obama garnered about 72% of the Hispanic vote. And I had a conversation literally with the president. I think because he paid attention. There you go asking a question again.
Yeah, but this is an important discussion. This is not just
let me finish my question,
okay.
Governor. Now, the point I made to the president was that never before has the Hispanic electorate played such a critical role in electing an American president. And it's my belief that never again will an American president be elected without openly courting America's Hispanic vote. Consider the following. Today in America, every 30 seconds, a Hispanic turns 18 and becomes an eligible voter. That's a potential 58,000 brand new voters every month, and that's going to be the case for the next 21 years in a row. In fairness, I know that Hispanics only comprise barely 3% of Ohio's overall population. So I understand if you don't necessarily have an extensive track record with the Hispanic community or Hispanic issues. But with all of that said, as a presidential candidate, what will you do to attract and electrify America's Hispanic vote?
Well, they're an integral part of our whole society. I mean, you know, we just appointed a Hispanic judge. Somebody on. We have a very sensitive issue on a collaborative police and community. We've got a Hispanic that I not only put on that, but asked to serve on the subsequent board. I mean, we point people to the university boards. We have one on the State Department of Education that that is just beginning to serve there. You have to be inclusive. You know, I not only feel this way about Hispanics, but I feel this way also about African Americans, you know, and I've spent a lot of effort in Ohio to make sure that everybody feels as though they have an opportunity to rise. And it's a natural for me. I also don't kind of think about this from the standpoint of segments, like there's that segment and this segment. I think of it in terms of Americans, all of whom have really the same hopes and dreams. Every mother, when she holds a baby, has big hopes and dreams for that baby, and everybody ought to feel as they're included. I mean, I think part of the problem in our country today is there are a lot of people who don't feel like they're included. So as the president, of course I want to be able to be in a position of where everybody has an opportunity to hold major posts and major positions. I mean, and it's not, to me, it's not even about vote. I mean, I'm going to get a vote, so I'm going to, what is that? I mean, that's boring to me. Well, I'm going to appoint you because I can get a vote. Why don't we just appoint people that we're excited to appoint so that they can rise? Now, that doesn't mean you don't look for certain opportunities to make sure that you have a society where everybody feels included. So you make efforts along those lines. But it's not because I want to have a vote. It's because it's the right thing to do. You know what, Javier? I don't know if you noticed this or not, but none of us are going to get out of this place alive. Okay? And you remember what the Pope said when he was here, that incredible, wonderful visit from the Holy Father. There will be an accounting for what we did while we had an opportunity here on this earth. I so firmly believe that. So if we're offering opportunity for everyone, that's really good. That's why we do it. Not because we're going to get something out of it. It's just the right thing to do.
Point well made, sir. Now, as a bit of a follow-up, I think we all know that words matter. And a few weeks ago, you made a comment about tipping a hotel maid when talking about the Hispanic community that some would say feeds into stereotypes. In fact, Hillary Clinton was very quick to tweet, and I quote, "Another product
That's because she's petrified that she'll run against me in November. Everybody knows that. I mean, there's no surprise there. I got to get through the primary to do it. I mean, yes."
And I quote, "Another product of the party of Trump, John Kasich, talking about Latinos doesn't just mean talking about tips." So 2 questions. Oh, and by the way.
And I used to like her.
By the way, I went on the record when I was asked, and I said that I believed that while it was a bit awkward, I thought that you were a decent man and that your comment was well-intentioned. So what's your take on all of this, Governor? And can you clarify the role that you think Hispanics play in an American economy of the future?
Well, you know, this is why you can't take this business of running for president too seriously. So let me tell you what happens. So I'm in my hotel room, and this lady writes me a beautiful note. I don't really know who she is. She writes me a beautiful note, and here's what the note says. "I really care about your stay in this hotel." What a nice thing for somebody to write. And then she drew a picture. There was a picture drawn, and you know, with the little flowers on the tree. When you run for president, or when you're governor, or when you're, you know, quote, in one of these big positions, your life can move at about 100 miles an hour. And mine sometimes moves at 100 miles an hour. I'm grateful for the fact that for whatever reason, I'm not telling you I got this all figured out, but the Lord has laid on me the notion that everybody's so important and everybody matters. And so that's really what I was commenting. I was in New Hampshire not long ago where I saw a woman who was Russian, by the way, doing some unbelievable housekeeping chores that I just said, you are just wonderful. So what do I think about the role of Hispanics? I think they can do everything and anything in this society. So people want to take things and they want to drive divisions, but if that's really, I don't understand that. You know, don't you have better things to do? And anything, me as a candidate, the things that I have said about the community have been very, very inclusive, very respectful. So I think that Hispanics from top to bottom play enormous roles in our society. But you know what? I'm glad I slowed down to notice that lady. You know, Brother Lawrence, he was a great theologian. He was a dishwasher. You know what? When he washed dishes, he prayed. I suspect when I get to heaven, hopefully I'm going to get there, I'm going to see Brother Lawrence, and he's going to have one of the biggest crowns on his head, because the Lord doesn't look at us as what your positions are. He looks at us with what's in our heart and rewards us that way.
So all work is good then. All work is good.
All work is noble. All work is dignity, you know?
Well, on that line, many would assume that Ohio's largest industry is manufacturing. However, according to the Ohio Farm Bureau, and contrary, I think, to popular belief, it appears that agriculture is, in fact, Ohio's top industry. As I understand it, agriculture contributes something like $105, $108 billion to the state's economy, and there are literally like 75,000 farms in your state. Now, I'm an American. I was born in this country. But growing up, I was a migrant farm worker. And I know what it's like to work in the sun all day long. I know what it's like, no coffee breaks, that's unheard of. No such thing as child labor laws. No, you're working from sun up to sundown. No holiday pay. If you wanted shade, brother, you put on a hat. There were no bathrooms, no running water. And if I wanted a drink of water, I had to pay a nickel for a ladle of water.
What do you think that I think about that?
I'm going to get to that. So I know firsthand the abuses that are suffered by our country's agriculture workers. With that said, and I bring this all up because back in April of this year, the Columbus Dispatch cited a report conducted by UCLA ranking Ohio as dead last among all 50 states for having policies and laws that support the health and well-being of agricultural workers, many of whom are immigrants, who I believe can be found right now contributing to Ohio's largest industry. Now, Governor, you've been pegged at times as a compassionate conservative, and I believe that you are. And I very much respect that you don't shy away from admitting how your views on immigration and a number of things are in fact evolving over time, as a good man should. As president, what do you say to what's going on in Ohio? And how would you ensure that all of America's working poor are treated fairly and decently as the President of the United States?
Well, what you just told me is news to me. So, you know, I have to find out what it really means, because a lot of times things come out.
Sure.
And when you get under the hood, you find out they're not true.
Sure.
But I can promise you that I will have an understanding of what the situation here is in Ohio. If look, my father would carry mail on his back. He'd go house to house. And he would be there in all the weather conditions. He never made a lot of money. His father was a coal miner who died of black lung and lost a lot of vision in his eye. My uncles, when the time came, my Uncle George has told me when the time came for them to get their pensions, the plants shut down. These injustices are not appropriate, and I'll find out exactly what the situation is. But in no way, shape, or form do I think people ought to be abused, that there shouldn't be child labor laws, that people shouldn't be treated with respect. You know, I'm somebody that is not at war with organized labor. You know, I've had my problems with them, but I made it clear to them that, look, as long as we work together, we'll be fine. So I'm going to find out what's going on in that front, and we'll deal with it.
Okay, we'll do a follow-up.
We don't let things like that just stand. Now, sometimes things are a little bit more complicated than they appear on the surface, but we'll dig into it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Let's talk about marriage equality.
Let me also tell you, just so people here know, Ohio is no longer just agriculture and manufacturing. We're now IT. We are now medical devices. We are now financial services.
Absolutely.
We're now logistics. Ohio is a different state than what you perceive it to be, because we have diversified the state.
No, I completely agree.
Okay.
I completely agree. On to marriage equality. During the first GOP debate, and I was watching, and I think you did an amazing job, by the way, you were applauded for your answer on how you would explain to your child your opposition to same-sex marriage. While talking about God's unconditional love and how that should be applied to everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation, you stated that when it comes to gay marriage, and I quote, "The court has ruled and will accept it." I want to get some more clarity on the phrase, "will accept it." A recent Pew report shows that some 56% of Americans today support same-sex marriage. Is it your view that the GOP should be more cognizant of the views of mainstream America, perhaps more accepting of that, and not fight this Supreme Court ruling?
Well, I'm not fighting it, and we actually had an amendment in Ohio that, but you know, look, it's decided. So we've moved on from that, and I don't support gay marriage. All my friends, a number of whom are gay, understand that, but you know, it's okay. We move on, and one of the guys that used to work for me, who is a friend of mine, I went to his wedding.
I heard.
Yeah, I said to my wife, "What do you think?" She said, "Well, I'm there, whether you go or not." So I went with her, and it was good. Let me just say something here, because it's appropriate time. There was an incredible article in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday in the review section of the paper about the growing drift of the West towards a secular society, and how people are always trying to pursue happiness and wealth and comfort. And what we're finding is that this aggressive search for a secular society isn't working, Javier, because you know what? Embedded in all of us is a sense of meaning. Now, I've mentioned God and faith and all that several times. I think the Pope did it best when he said we should focus on the do's and not the don'ts, and that's why people got so excited in America about the potential of religion, which is about grace and hope and purpose and living a life beyond yourself. But there's a bigger issue here. When the West becomes a fully secularized society, how are we supposed to operate in a free society when when everybody wants to pursue things their own way? With two guys walking across a bridge, who gets knocked off? What is the appropriate way for us to be able to guide ourselves with an absence of laws? And if we become a secular society without a sense that there is a set of expectations, morals that are set on high that should guide us, then who's right and who's wrong becomes completely subjective. I don't happen to think that's how we would have the best society. I don't think Hispanics would believe that, because I think they believe, and I think that most Americans, there's a change going on in America. All I'm suggesting to you is this: if we become secularists, when we face a radical Islam that is the farthest thing from secularist, and when we can't unite with our friends in the Jewish, the Muslim, and the Christian community to espouse a set of values that is the true way for human beings to conduct their lives and live their lives, we will be at a very, very severe crisis point, Javier. So I don't want anybody to try to read any, well, they will, but I'm just saying to you that the sense of right and wrong that comes from the great religions is something that the West should begin to pay attention to and not continue to drive towards a totally secular society. I think it's very dangerous for our children and for our culture.
Okay. Point well made.
Well, you didn't expect to hear that today. Neither did they. But I feel very strongly about it. It's something we need to talk about.
Point very well made. Let's talk about the economy a bit. I think this is an issue that all Americans, this is not a Hispanic issue specifically, but all Americans, I think, care about the jobs in this country and care about the continued well-being of our economy. And the USHCC is proud to stand for a very strong free market economy where entrepreneurs can pursue their version of the American dream with limited government intervention. In fact, Hispanic businesses, which now, as I said earlier, are at about 4.1 million, contributing about $661 billion to our economy, I think are at the forefront of American economic growth. We're starting new ventures at a rate of 3 to 1 when compared to the general market. With all of this said, as president, how would you continue to spur the growth of all American businesses, but specifically Hispanic and minority-owned businesses?
Well, first of all, before I become president, I want, for those that are listening, I want all Hispanic businesses to move to Ohio, okay? And the reason is that in our state, uh-oh, now we have multiple phones. We are really headed into, anyway. We have no income tax on virtually all small businesses in our state. Look, here's, Javier, what the problem is. If you don't have economic growth, then it stunts your ability to reach out to people who do live in the shadows, to do creative things. It's just a fact. If mom and dad are in a financial bind, the kids don't do as well. When mom and dad do well, the kids do better. Same with the country. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we have a nightmare of regulations. You know, what we need is we need a people's court where people who are normal folks can go and say, why is government so dumb? Why are you killing my ability to create a job? So on the regulatory side, it's a huge deal. And I'll give you one example. You were talking about Wall Street. We put all these rules on the banks, and what we're doing is we're making the big banks bigger, and we're killing the community and the mid-sized banks. Now, if you're a Hispanic trying to get a loan, do you think you're going to get one? Where's it easier to get one? From Citigroup or to get one from the local banker who knows you? And so these rules and regulations are choking us. It's in so many ways. And these rules get promulgated by these agencies and departments, and it's like a blizzard of stuff that trips us up. Number two, you got to have a tax code that does encourage more economic growth, particularly at the corporate side, so that these businesses will be able to bring that money back from Europe. They can invest in plant and equipment so workers can have higher productivity, higher wages. And when it gets to the individual tax code, we'd like to bring those rates down and make it simpler. And we're working on things that we're going to be talking about soon. In addition to that, we need to get on a road to a balanced budget. When we balanced the budget and cut the capital gains tax and had a family tax credit on the deal which I was the architect, the economy was going gangbusters. In Ohio, now that we have simplified rules, balanced the budget, cut taxes, workforce training, guess what's happened? We're up 347,000 private sector jobs. Ohio's reborn. So we have to get back to the basics, and it's not that difficult. We're going to have to deal with entitlements. We got to deal with the balanced budget. We got to rebuild the defense. At the same time, we reform the Pentagon. We've got to have the tax reform. We got to change the regulatory environment. All these things can happen with a solid plan. And I'll tell you what, you got about 120 days. I think individual tax reform will be extremely difficult, but I think corporate tax reform can happen. And this has to happen. You can't delay. You can't like walk around trying to, looking at the pictures in the White House, oh, I wonder how our plans are coming. You got to go in there knowing what you're going to do, because this town will fight you every single inch of the way, Javier. They are for themselves. They are self-protecting. And if you don't go in there with a purpose and an intensity and a team, you're going to just get 8 more years of what we got here, 4 more years of what we got now. And that doesn't help us. It doesn't give people work and hope and jobs and all the things we need.
I have to say that in transparency and fairness, we work with all of the large banks and the small ones.
Oh, okay, Javier, good advertisement. I know you still need their money, but it would be better if we didn't strangle the little banks, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to strangle them. I mean, the big banks have their place, but it's the community banks. It's the Delaware County Bank where they look at you and they say, Javier, I've known you for a long time. Do we give you the loan, or we know you. We know the kind of person you are. We're going to give it to you. What would you rather? Isn't that the way it works? That's like trying to run education out of Washington as opposed to a local school board. You can't even get in the building here to talk about education, but there you can go to the school board meeting. The more local it is, the more customized it is, the better we all are. That's why I'm a Republican, by the way, because I'm for bottom up, not top down.
Gotcha. And back to my point,
good
we work with
advertisement,
J.P. Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo.
I'm okay, great.
And they do an amazing job of SBA lending.
I'm not against the big banks.
Amazing job of SBA lending.
You're the one defending the big banks. I'm the one who worked on Wall Street. Let's figure this out.
Let's move on to the wage gap. Throughout our country, women's wages continue to stubbornly lag behind men's. And I think as we stand, women today earn about 70 cents on the dollar when compared to men for doing the exact same work, generally speaking. And Hispanic women, by the way, it's 60 cents on the dollar. So according to the American Association of University Women and the Census Bureau, median earnings for men in Ohio were $47,300 compared to women's median earnings of $36,500. So generally, doing a little better than the rest of the country, but still, women in Ohio are getting paid roughly 25%, 24% less than men for doing the same job. First, as a father, how would you explain that to your daughters? And second, as the president, what would you do to address this disparity?
Well, look, whenever we see it, we try to do what we can to, because a lot of it is based on experience and time. I mean, a lot of different factors go into it, but we don't want to have a woman paid less than a man for the same job. And how would I explain that to my daughters? I would say, we got to work on this, girls. And because look, I've got 2 daughters who are going to be out there in the workplace, right, in the workforce, and I want them to be treated and have the same opportunities as a man, I'm glad we're doing, according to that study,
You're doing
we're
better,
doing
yeah.
better. Well, according to that one, you know, who knows? There's 50 studies, but we want to make sure that in these places, in the workforce, that people are treated, you know, not discriminated against, that they're in a position of where they can do better. In terms of the wage gap, you know, some people think we can fix the income inequality by taking from the top person to give to somebody else and redistribute wealth. I don't think that works. You know, my father, I used to say, Daddy, what do you think about the rich? He said, Johnny, we don't hate the rich, we want to be the rich. And part of the issue, I absolutely firmly believe it's all tied up in skills. Do you get the good education, or do you not have the skills to be able to compete? And I have to suggest to all of us here that I don't think our K through 12 system is working as well as it should be. In my state now, we now have passed a law that says if a school is failing 3 years in a row, that we can have a board that can pick a CEO that still will pay it, will still keep in place teachers' salary and their benefits, but everything else can be changed. We started that in Cleveland. Now, Javier, if we have failing, in the city of Youngstown, 1% of the graduates are college ready. Now, what kind of money you think they're going to make?
Yeah.
And so we, with a vengeance, have to begin to really work inside these schools to make sure that our schools are performing. In Massachusetts, where they enacted high standards and took a lot of grief, those schools are performing far better than most of the other schools in the country. We can't want to live in Lake Wobegon, where we think, well, our kids are doing great because they got an A in school and 40% of the graduates are taking remedial courses. Give them skills, because when you have skills, you can't be kept back. You think nobody cares if you're an IT expert, no one cares who you are. They just want your talents and they'll pay for it. So it is a big education issue and lifelong education, lifelong training. You can't just sit there and think the world's standing still. Workforce programs ought to be shifted to the states, not run out of Washington.
But John Kasich did not say that women are less skilled than men.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay,
No, are you kidding me?
I clarified
My wife's
that.
far more skilled than me. No,
because you got to go back home with both those girls.
No, look, my chief of staff was the first time that a governor brought a woman in to be the new chief of staff. She's now running my campaign. No, you know, the lady I mentioned earlier, running mental health and drug addiction. We have you know, she's doing a fantastic job. The head of our welfare reform. I mean, I believe that having women in the room, having a big voice, makes you better. And if you have an exclusion of them, you're not as effective.
I agree.
No, but I'm saying that for all people,
yeah,
skills matter.
Gotcha. Let's talk about trade a bit. A big issue the USHCC has worked on of late has been trade, and specifically the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. Considering that 98% of U.S. businesses that do export are actually small businesses, which have accounted for nearly 2/3 of new jobs in recent decades, we think access to more markets abroad is actually a good thing for the entrepreneurs that we represent. So my question to you, with Ohio being a state that some would say has been hurt from poor trade deals in the past, I'd like to hear your thoughts on TPP, along with the possibility of future trade deals under President Kasich.
Well, I think that that trade is really important for 2 or 3 different reasons. One is you talk about how it's helped small businesses. Secondly, there's a national security element to it also. I mean, I like the idea of having deeper economic relations, thus ties to countries in the Pacific as a, you know, as a, how would I say, as a strengthening of our relations vis-a-vis China. I think it's really important. Here's where I think the trade is a problem. I think trade is a problem when people cheat and we look the other way, or we file our complaints and they go into this, we're going to study it bin. Which means that a couple years later, they finally make a decision. And if you're right, that's great, but the people who were affected are out of work. We need an expedited process to blow the whistle and stop. For example, the ability of countries to dump their products in our country or to steal our intellectual property. Part of the reason I think we don't act aggressively might be for geopolitical considerations. But look, you're a steel worker in Lorain, Ohio or something. You're not that caring that much about geopolitical considerations. Your geopolitical considerations are the mouse you have to feed at home.
Yeah.
So while I think that trade is good, we got to have the way to blow the whistle when we are getting ripped off. And I think for a while America's maybe a little bit arrogant. Yeah, we can take it. I don't think we should take it. And I also think that we got to be careful in these negotiations. I don't know what this thing's going to look like. I would, I favor it on the headline. The Senate will look at it. They should. But I'm going to work like the Dickens to make sure that we have an expedited process that can respond to countries when they are ripping us off.
Fair enough. National security. As president, you would be the nation's commander-in-chief. And as a global power, the U.S. is constantly facing threats, both here and abroad. We're currently seeing a Syrian regime that's being aided by Russian forces, supposedly. A refugee crisis that nations throughout the world are trying to grapple with, and the continued spread of ISIS throughout the Middle East, just to name a few things off the top of our heads here. So my question is, you were going to ask me another question, weren't you?
No, I was going to say Ukraine. You left them out.
Okay, throw them in there. So my question is, in your view, what are the biggest national security threats that our nation faces today, and how would you prioritize the national resources to combat them as the president?
Well, first of all, you can chew gum and walk at the same time when you're America. Our problem has been the voids that we've created around the world, our inability to kind of assert ourselves. And I just think the president's spokesman probably said it best in defining their strategy, which is, Javier, you lead from behind. Now, you've never led from behind, nor have I. When you lead from behind, it just doesn't work. So I don't know where you want to start. Syria, I propose that we create no-fly zones and sanctuaries for people to be able to be safe. Somebody violates the no-fly zone, they're going to face the consequences of violating the no-fly zone. Secondly, we have to have a coalition of people, both in the Middle East and our European allies, to destroy ISIS as soon as possible and then come home. Nation building is not something that I'm keen on. The Iran deal, I think should never have been, negotiations should never have been conducted until the minimum that Iran would have recognized Israel's right to exist. What I've said, some candidates say, well, I'd rip it up. Okay, going to rip it up, first of all, 18 months before you're elected, and then what do we do, okay? So my feeling is it's better to be able to work with your partners to show any violations that occur so that if we slap sanctions back on, which can be effective, that's what brought Iran to the table to begin with, need to be applied. If we know they're developing a nuclear weapon, we don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. There's appropriate action you would take if you know where it is and you have the capability to deal with it. By the way, I served on the Armed Services Committee for 18 years with some of the finest defense minds, with Les Aspin and Sam Nunn and Gary Hart and John Stennis and Barry Goldwater and John Tower. I lived with those people for a lot of years from the standpoint of working through things. Israel, the Prime Minister wants to come here. I'll have a cup of coffee with him day or night, okay? Ukraine, give them the defensive weapons they need. I mean, how could America look the other way when the Ukrainians are under this kind of pressure? I don't understand it. Putin is a bully. Do you know how you deal with bullies? Do you ever have a bully, Javier? Yeah. How'd you deal with them? Did you run away?
No.
You popped them one.
Yeah.
And the fact is that Putin is a bully, and he's going to push as far as he can until we say enough. Pre-positioning equipment in the East, which we're beginning to do. Making it clear that an attack on the Baltics is an attack on us. I mean, these are the South China Sea. We should be sending a carrier through there. The problem we have is that the Chinese think they own the South China Sea, and they do not. This is all about America asserting itself more in the world. And I think if we do it as a group, as a coalition, then we don't have to be policemen of the world. We should intervene directly when our direct national interests are at risk, but there's a possibility of us being able to help people who share our goals and visions, and we can help them. So, and we have to rebuild the military. I saw they're going to have to withdraw the carrier from over in the Med. And, you know, it's a real problem because we don't have one to put on station. So we're going to have to rebuild the military. But the problem there is the Pentagon has become so bureaucratic with almost 900,000 people involved in all this bureaucracy there. We start throwing good money, you know, good money after bad. It has to be reformed at the same time we're rebuilding the military. Why did I want to run for this job? But these are very tricky things. The President of the United States has to look over at the Pentagon, get it right. The President of the United States can't have a Secretary of Defense say, okay, go for procurement reform, trim down the bureaucracy, fix the thing. By the way, you're on your own. It takes presidential leadership to get this done. We are going to have to spend a fortune rebuilding the military. But Javier, we don't want to spend a fortune on things we don't need or have red tape and lack of common sense over there being the order of the day. And you can't go over there and pound people because they will not move, and you can't go over there and suck up because there'll be no change. It's like porridge. It's got to be made at the right temperature. And the president must stay engaged.
So in short, lead from the front.
Yeah, but with what you have, with a clear vision and the notion that our allies matter. You know, when they shot and murdered all those people at Charlie over there in Paris, they had the big million people mourning. We didn't send anybody. I don't even understand that. How do you just ignore that? Our relations have deteriorated. Our friends don't know if they can trust us, and our enemies are emboldened. Now, is that a reason to panic? No. We're America. We don't panic. We just got to get about it.
Get it together. Well, you remind me of an old adage in terms of leading from the front that my grandfather used to use. And he used to say that unless you're the lead dog, the view never changes.
That's right.
You strike me as a lead dog. Any final thoughts?
Well, this was unbelievable. This was great. I hope they enjoyed it. You know, it was exhaustive and a lot of issues. And
I think they enjoyed it.